Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Good morning, I'm Jim DeFede and welcome to Facing South Florida. Later in the show, we will have a preview of an exclusive interview CBS News Miami anchor Betty Nguyen did with Elizabeth Scherer, the judge who oversaw the trial of the Parkland killer. But we start with the Florida legislature, which begins its 60-day session tomorrow. To get a sense of what we can expect, I spoke to Republican State Representative Chip LaMarca, who represents parts of Broward County. I asked him what his main priorities will be this year.
I'm going to be running a bill. Matter of fact, because we're approaching the eve of session, just got the language worked out with the Speaker's office for My Safe Florida Home. And I ran that last year, and there's some condo versions of that. I'm a strong believer that people have to take some responsibility, and the insurance crisis is hitting everybody. There's no doubt about that. But with programs like My Safe Florida Home, when an inspection's done on a home and they identify things that can harden the home and make it more stronger for a hurricane, for example, hurricane resistant, the state has a grant program, and that grant program requires the homeowner and has lower income all the way up through moderate thresholds to invest in their home. And then there's a 2-to-1 grant. So it is saying the state is with you. We're not leaving you behind. And ultimately, hopefully, as more home structures, more houses and townhouses that are hardened for hurricanes, rates will come down. And obviously a lot of other market things in that. But that's a big issue for me. Worked on a bill last year called the Osborne Reef. And we just got, the DEP just brought our report, which documents where we are with that. And if you haven't heard of the Osborne Reef, it's the old tire reef that they threw the tires in the ocean and in the 70s and made a mess of things through hurricanes and other things when they came apart. So what we'd like to actually do, and Senator Avila in Miami brought this to me last year, we worked on it together. We'd like to actually create that artificial reef after this, and it'll also help with the dredging and mitigation of what's going to happen at Port Everglades in the future. So that's another important thing for us. And then I think really looking at, to your point, what's the global picture? What Representative LaMarca is doing this, but what's everybody else doing? What's the governor have priorities on? I think the big issue this year in the House certainly, and looking at what the Senate's doing is looking at healthcare. We worked on kid care last 2 years ago, and we've worked on some other issues that will affect affordability of health insurance. But I think ultimately we've got to look at it as a state, from telemedicine and other ways to deliver it, but also what we're doing as far as taking care of the most vulnerable among us.
Well, let me pick up on that last point about healthcare. Obviously, Florida remains one of only 10 states in the country not to accept Medicaid expansion. The federal dollars, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in federal money that could come to the state of Florida to help provide health care to upwards of 800,000 Floridians. Would you be in favor of expanding Medicaid?
I think we're doing that now. We're doing that step by step. We did it with maternal care. We did it last year with kid care for families with children, raising the poverty line 300%. I think we're doing it where populations need it the most. I think the mission of the state of Florida, and maybe different than other states, is that the able-bodied human beings here in the state of Florida that can get out and work, we want to create every opportunity and every reward for them to do that. And we want to make sure that the most vulnerable among us, whether it's seniors or single parents, single mothers, children, that they're covered. And I mean, that's really my answer. I think we have been expanding it in part by part.
Yeah, but I guess the pushback would naturally be, these are our dollars. These are dollars that Floridians have paid into the federal government that we're not getting back for some sort of political reason. I guess some sort of, ideological reason that we don't want to accept Obamacare and the rest of it out of Washington. It seems to me that if 800,000 additional Floridians could be covered by Medicaid expansion, why wouldn't we do it?
I think the big issue there are the strings that come with federal dollars. And I understand that there's a lot of money and it's very tempting out there. We've seen this with major transportation projects in the past. Healthcare, I don't put healthcare and transportation in the same bucket. Healthcare is more important, but I think we're addressing that. We're addressing it piece by piece. And I think we're building a system that's going to be much more resilient than if we just said, all right, we're going to take the federal money. What if we actually get a situation where they balance the federal budget and they actually have to clamp down on some things? So my concern, and I agree, there's some parts of that are attractive, but I want to make sure we take care of the most vulnerable among us and make sure that families can afford health care.
I know there's also an issue that's recently come up about the Department of Children and Families deciding not to request some $240+ million from federal dollars that could go to help feed children in the state of Florida. And the state is saying that they're not going to apply for that money either, for many of the same reasons that you just sort of cited with regard to Medicaid expansion. Should we be taking those dollars?
Well, so I read into that. I had some constituents reach out to me, emails, phone calls, read into it. And if you hear it like you just said it, yeah, why wouldn't we take it, right? My understanding from all the articles that I've read and reaching out to the Department of Agriculture is they're not set up to implement that program. They have other programs that the state of Florida is covering. I agree with the idea that there's an attractive position to taking federal money for a lot of things. But I think we're gonna put $16 billion in have a $16 billion reserve in the state of Florida. I think we've been covering our bills pretty well, and I'm not saying we go it alone because the federal money really comes from us, other than when they print a little extra. The reality is, the state of Florida, thanks to hardworking Floridians and our new Floridians who have gotten their driver's license and registered to vote, and they're now Floridians, and had conversation today with someone from Massachusetts, my birth state, but Florida's my home state, and he said I have to keep correcting myself when I say back home. He's like, I'm a Floridian now. So I think the mission of Florida is to make sure that we take care of the people here, and that the people here who are able to provide for themselves, we create an economy and a marketplace where they can thrive and have careers, not jobs, and have a sensible income and be able to afford a house and a mode of transportation to get to work. So, I mean, that's something I've always believed since I was at the county or even at the city government. And I think we're doing a good job at the state, but there will always be discussions like you and I are having now to make sure we're going the right direction.
The bill that you've been working on for the last couple of years about hardening homes, I think that's a really excellent point that you're making about trying to do the things that are necessary to help bring down the insurance rates, particularly windstorm insurance. I don't know that Floridians are really seeing a real change yet. How long before you think some of those reforms will actually have an effect? I know we're seeing some new companies enter in. I've actually just been moved out of Citizens into another company that's going to raise my rates about $2,000 as a result. But I mean, when are we going to see rates come down, do you think?
I think you actually described the situation. We did the litigation piece, trying to slow down the lawsuit abuse, want to make sure policyholders can get service from their insurance companies. So we're holding insurance companies accountable as well to respond to claims and make sure that they work those out. But from a standpoint of when does the average homeowner see a rate come down? I think what we're seeing now is a decrease in some of these rate increases, which is a terrible comparison to what the president's been talking about inflation. But the reality is it's all on a curve, and that trend is slowing. When it flattens here, I think by the end of this year, I think the biggest issue, Jim, is when I go to HOA meetings and different neighborhood gatherings, and that's the question. They say, why is my insurance going up so much? And I'm not going to only say, well, it's because of all the lawsuits. That's an element of it, but it's also inflation. We've had some major storms hit the West Coast and the East Coast of Florida and the Panhandle and the Big Bend. And one of the biggest issues when you have to do all that cleanup, just like if you're doing work at your house, everything has gone up, right? The materials themselves, the labor, and we can't say, well, for insurance claims, when the contractor goes out to restore a home or rebuild something, that it's going to be any, there's some, flat line in costs. Unfortunately, they've gone up as well. So when all those things come together, I think we're going to see some decent decreases in where we are now. Now, do we get back to where we were, some mythical point 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago? Probably not. We want to make that as affordable as possible, and I think insurance is one area where we continue to do that.
When we come back, we will hear from the Democratic leader of the Florida House, Fentrice Driskell. Stay with us. Welcome back. Because Republicans hold supermajorities in both the Florida House and the Florida Senate, Democrats have little to no clout
Nevertheless, they file their bills and argue for the things they think are important. The Democratic leader in the Florida House is Fentrice Driskell from Tampa. I asked her what issues she expects will dominate this year's legislative session.
So it's interesting. The Republicans have really been keeping their cards close to the chest. I don't think we have a strong sense emerging from committee weeks what session is going to be about. We did see the Live Healthy Act drop in the Senate, and we know that healthcare is going to be a big piece of what we talk about. But what a missed opportunity to have a big healthcare bill that doesn't mention expanding Medicaid at all. Florida is one of only 10 states that has not expanded Medicaid. And so now we're sitting at the kiddies table with Alabama and Mississippi, when instead we could be focused on expanding high quality healthcare access to Floridians who need it. And we know that expanding Medicaid would cover at least another 800,000 Floridians.
How many children? How many of the 800,000? How many of them would be children? It's a large number that would be children as well, correct?
It is a large number that would be children. And I'll tell you, even though I don't have the exact number, I know that it's a large number. And I'll tell you too, in studying this over the summer, what I learned, Florida under DeSantis's leadership has been disenrolling just hundreds of thousands of people from Medicaid, and the majority of them have been children. And so as some of the federal funds dry up from the American Rescue Act and other things, we're going through a disenrollment process with Medicaid. And not to get too into the weeds, the state has been disrolling people for purely technical reasons sometimes, not necessarily because they're no longer eligible. And it's children who are being hurt the most. So when it comes to children in the state of Florida and its Medicaid program, we don't have a very good track record. The Republicans don't have a very good track record of taking care of kids.
And I think it's really important to remind everyone that when we talk about Medicaid expansion, we're talking about bringing back to the state of Florida dollars that the state of Florida pays into the system. That these are federal dollars that would come into Florida that would be, would cover at least 90%, if not more, of the cost. And we've put hundreds of millions of dollars left in Washington that could come home to Florida. Just to basically be able to say, we refuse to participate in a Washington program.
That's exactly right. These are Floridians' hard-earned taxpayer dollars. And so what happens is it effectively renders Florida a donor state, because you better believe that there are other states who are taking advantage of our taxpayer dollars and giving their own people health care. So it's been a frustration of mine and many in my caucus as to why Medicaid expansion has been made such a partisan issue by the Republicans. To me, it's an economic issue. Every Floridian has the freedom to be healthy, prosperous, and safe, and that certainly includes the right to have access to healthcare, especially when it's already our taxpayer dollars are already going towards the cost.
And it's now not just healthcare; it's also food programs, correct? Like there's a federal grant that is available, $248 million, I think it is, to feed hungry kids in the state of Florida. That is not going to be accessed, that the Department of Children and Families says they are not going to apply for, even though they're entitled to that money.
Yeah, and Jim, we've been tracking that too. And so the concern that you raise to me is a part of a broader conversation over what's been happening under DeSantis's leadership, where he is so focused on his own ambition and running for president and drawing absurd distinctions between him and President Biden that he won't allow the state to accept federal dollars that would actually help kids. And once again, as you pointed out earlier, these are dollars that taxpayers in Florida are already paying into this system. There's no good logical reason for turning down that money, especially when we know that it would go towards feeding hungry kids.
Well, let me ask you this. We both know and understand the reality of politics, that both the House and the Senate have supermajorities of Republicans, and so therefore often ideas put forth by the Democratic Party and its representatives don't even get a hearing, let alone an actual vote. But nevertheless, the Democrats in the House do have an agenda that they want to put forward. Give me an idea of if you were able to put forth and get committee hearings going and those sorts of issues, what is the agenda that the Democrats would like to see the state of Florida take up, and how would it benefit Floridians?
We want Floridians to be able to imagine a future where those who need healthcare have access to it. Imagine communities that are free from gun violence, or where gun violence is reduced. Imagine that there's housing affordability and that there really is that future where everyone has the freedom to be healthy, prosperous, and safe. These are the sorts of issues that we focus on in our agenda. It's not the culture war stuff. It's not that. I think Floridians have had enough of that. They want the legislature to get back to doing the work of the people, and that is what we propose. So you will see from us a bill that proposes a property insurance commission that focuses on putting some accountability and transparency in that industry, as opposed to what the Republicans have been doing, which includes giving $3 billion bailouts to the insurance industry. You'll see a bill on common sense gun ownership, not talking about removing a gun from a single lawful gun owner, but focusing on some of those common sense issues where Republicans, Democrats, and independents agree that could help make our communities safer. And you will certainly see a bill on Medicaid expansion, because as I mentioned before, it's time to put aside partisan politics and do what's best for the people of the state of Florida. And that means bringing our taxpayer dollars back home and expanding access to healthcare.
How frustrating is it that when you put forth these bills, likely none of them will actually get a hearing?
It is very frustrating, but I always say that as Democrats, we've been in the minority for quite some time in Florida, and we know how to do this. We know how to push for accountability, transparency. We know how to make our voices heard. And it's my hope that through this legislative session, we'll be able to take that even more directly to the people and really paint the vision of what Florida would look like if we were in charge, if there were grownups in charge, because I think it would be just a healthier, better Florida for all of us.
What's the anticipation of what it's going to be like when Governor DeSantis returns to the state after having lost in Iowa, if he does in fact lose, and getting knocked out of the presidential race? What kind of a governor do we think he'll be after that? What's the talk around Tallahassee regarding that?
Yeah, I think I'm of two minds on this issue because on the one hand, we certainly have seen DeSantis's power diminish, right? Like you look at the instance of the embattled Republican Party of Florida chair, Christian Ziegler. DeSantis was one of the first Republican elected officials to call for Ziegler to resign, and he still hasn't. And so that lets you know that DeSantis's power is waning, because if this had happened like a year ago or so, I don't think there would have been any question that Ziegler would have been forced out. On the other hand, maybe it's of none effect whether he comes back weaker or everything stay the same, because they all agree on the same issues, right? Like the Republicans in the legislature and DeSantis agree on restricting abortion access. They agree on limiting access to Medicaid. They agree on these bills, to weaken child labor laws. So they're lockstep with respect to policy. So in one sense, it doesn't really matter if he comes back weaker or stronger. It's still going to be a devastating session for the people of Florida.
You mentioned Christian Ziegler. I haven't had a chance to speak to you since the scandal broke surrounding him. Obviously, we don't know if he'll be charged with a crime. There's certainly evidence that is contradictory in terms of the alleged accuser's statements. But putting that aside, the scandal itself has been, the talk of Tallahassee as well as the rest of the state. What's your take on what's happening with Christian Ziegler and the Republican Party at this point?
Well, I think that these are allegations that must be taken seriously, right? And, in the end, it sends a message, I think, of what the Republican Party thinks about those who have been victims of sexual assault and sexual abuse. The fact that he is still there and they have not been able to get him to step down. But I know that the authorities will do their jobs and conduct this investigation, and we hope that they do it thoroughly so we can really find out what happened and what really is the truth. But it's become such a distraction to their party, the fact that he will not resign, But my greatest concern in all of this, of course, is that they're very serious allegations of sexual assault and sexual abuse, and those must be, thoroughly investigated. And if there is found to be just cause, they must be prosecuted.
A footnote to our conversation: if Florida were to expand Medicaid, more than 300,000 children will be eligible who currently have no health insurance. Also, with the start of the legislative session next week, I'll be heading up to Tallahassee, where the state Senate is scheduled to hold a committee hearing on the treatment of the mentally ill in the criminal justice system. I'll be reporting from Tallahassee as part of our ongoing coverage of the crisis that started with our documentary Warehouse, The Life and Death of Tristan Murphy, and continued last week with the latest revelations out of the Broward County Jail. Now, when we come back, I'll be joined by my colleague Betty Nguyen to discuss her exclusive interview with Elizabeth Scherer, the judge who oversaw the Parkland shooting trial. That's right after the break. Welcome back. Elizabeth Scherer was the judge who oversaw the trial of the Parkland killer. It was a long and contentious affair, and her treatment of the defense attorneys during the case was widely criticized in legal circles. Her conduct in the case led the Florida Supreme Court to issue a public reprimand of Scherer last year, which found Scherer, quote, allowed her emotions to overcome her judgment, end quote. Scherer stepped down from the bench in June and has maintained her silence about the case until now, as she sat down for the first time with CBS News Miami anchor Betty Nguyen, who joins me now. Betty, congratulations. This is an interview that many people have wanted for a long time, and I want to talk to you about it, but I want to start with a clip from your interview.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and play that now, and then we'll talk on the other side.
So let's get to some of the moments in the trial that stick out in a lot of folks' head.
Okay.
Do you feel at any point that you unduly chastised the public defender, Melissa McNeil?
So there was a lot that was going on during that trial that I felt was extremely unprofessional and disrespectful, not only to the court, but to the families. As a judge, there's only certain tools that you have to address that type of disrespect. And, you know, did I handle it perfectly? Perhaps not, but I did what I thought needed to be done in order to maintain decorum and to keep that trial moving in a way that was fair to all parties.
Betty, I can't wait. I know you've got so much material here that it's going to be over 3 parts. Tell me, why do you think she sat down with you finally and broke her silence on this case?
I think she was ready. I think she was ready to speak her truth. Time had gone by. She had resigned. She's now practicing civil law. And I think it was time for her to do some reflection and talk about her experience there. What we do is we really go through some of the most controversial issues during that trial. And she speaks openly. She speaks candidly. But I will tell you, there is a lot of reflection in it, and you will see that in my interview.
Do you think, how do you think the experience of this trial has changed her in some ways?
Well, I think she's changed in many ways, clearly. She's now practicing civil law, where she used to be a judge behind the bench. And I also think, too, she has connected following the trial. The families have reached out to her, and she has formed some bonds with them. And I think she's just trying to figure out what's next. Yes, she is an attorney. She works in civil law, but there are so many other opportunities that are coming at her as well. So I think this is a time of trying to figure out, okay, this is where I am. Where do I go from here?
I don't want to give away too much, but I know you also deal with that hug that was so controversial that we saw.
Right.
You know, just talk to me briefly just about that and what we're going to hear about that.
Well, she's very honest about, you know, how it played out. We learn exactly what happened, her thinking at the time, and then I also ask her, you know, did you come to a moment during that where you thought, oh no, there's going to be some repercussions from this? And so she answers it, and I think she tackles all of the issues very head on.
You know, it's such a human experience to go through that. We think of judges as being lofty individuals devoid of emotion, but
they're human.
But they're human. I think that's what we're going to see in the interview, so I can't wait to see it. All right, Betty, again, I can't wait to see your exclusive reports. Now, Part 1 airs tomorrow on CBS News Miami's Morning Edition in our 6:30 half hour. Well, that's all the time we have for this week's edition of Facing South Florida. We'll be back again next week. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day.